The sun hung low and golden over the Willowbrook swimming pool, painting everything in the warmest shades of peach and honey. It was the very last day of summer, and 6-year-old David stood at the edge of the pool in his favorite striped swimming trunks, the blue and white ones with the little anchors on them. He pressed his toes over the edge and looked down at the sparkling water below. Ripples of light danced across the bottom of the pool like tiny, shimmering fish. David took a deep breath and smiled. He loved this pool more than almost anything in the world. But today felt different. Today felt like something wonderful was about to happen. He just wasn't quite sure what it was yet. David's mom sat on a striped deck chair nearby, reading her book, her sun hat tilted just slightly to one side. Around the pool, a few other families splashed and laughed, their voices floating up like bubbles into the warm afternoon air. David dipped one toe into the water. It was perfectly cool. Not too cold, not too warm, just right, like a gentle hug from the swimming pool itself. He was about to jump in when something at the far end of the pool caught his eye. Something big, something green, something that had absolutely no business being at a swimming pool at all. It was a T-Rex. But not like any T-Rex David had ever seen in his books. This dinosaur was tall and cheerful looking, with the brightest green scales and the most unusual thing about him, his arms. Most T-Rexes had tiny little arms, barely bigger than a pair of socks. But this T-Rex had long, lovely arms that swung happily at his sides. And at the end of those long arms were the friendliest pair of hands, waving enthusiastically in David's direction. The dinosaur was wearing swimming goggles pushed up on top of his enormous head, and he was grinning the widest, most wonderful grin David had ever seen. "Hello there," the T-Rex called out in a warm, rumbling voice, like a friendly thunderstorm. "My name is Rex, and you must be David." David blinked. He looked around to see if anyone else was noticing the enormous dinosaur with the long arms standing at the edge of the pool. But somehow, everyone else seemed perfectly calm. The families splashing, his mum reading, the seagulls wheeling overhead. It seemed this particular magic was just for David. He straightened up, squared his shoulders the way his dad had taught him when he wanted to feel brave, and called back across the glittering water. "Yes, I'm David. How do you know my name?" Rex chuckled, a deep rolling sound like pebbles tumbling in a stream. "Because I've been waiting for you," he said warmly. "This being the last day of summer and all, I thought you might be ready for one last adventure." David paddled over to Rex, who, it turned out, was standing in the shallow end, which only came up to his enormous green knees, and looked up at the dinosaur with wide, curious eyes. "What kind of adventure?" he asked. Rex reached into a small bag he had slung over one of his wonderfully long arms and pulled out a rolled-up piece of paper. But the moment Rex unrolled it, the most extraordinary thing happened. The paper was completely blank, and then, right before David's eyes, lines began to appear all by themselves, curling, swooping, careful little lines, drawing a map. A path wound through the pool, around the diving board, past the big blue water slide, and toward something at the very center of the pool, marked with a small glowing star. "A map that draws itself," David breathed, eyes wide as dinner plates. "It draws the way your heart wants to go," Rex explained gently, crouching down on his big green haunches so his long arms could hold the map at David's eye level. "The map doesn't show you someone else's path. It shows you yours. David studied the winding line carefully. It started right where they were standing, in the cool, shimmering shallows. The first stop on the map appeared to be the big rainbow-colored pool floats stacked near the steps. A pile of flamingos, pineapples, and one very grand-looking unicorn float. As David looked at the map, a little arrow appeared, pointing right toward them, as if to say, "Start here." David felt something warm flutter in his chest, like a small, happy bird taking flight. David and Rex waded over to the pile of floats, and David climbed up onto the magnificent unicorn, which bobbed gently as Rex used his long, helpful arms to push it out into the middle of the pool. From up on the float, the whole pool looked different, vast and shimmering and full of secret sparkle. The map, which David held carefully above the water, drew a new line leading toward the diving board. But there was something there David hadn't noticed before. Hanging from the diving board's rail, swaying in the soft breeze, was a small cluster of golden bubbles. Not ordinary bubbles, but ones that caught the light and glowed faintly, each one containing what looked like a tiny summer memory inside. Sandcastles, ice creams, garden sprinklers, laughter. Those are your summer memories, Rex said softly, swimming alongside the unicorn float with long, easy strokes, his big arms making him the most graceful swimmer David had ever seen. At the end of every summer, they float up and wait to be collected before the season folds away. David reached up carefully and cupped the golden bubbles in his hands. They were warm and light, and when he held them, he felt a rush of happiness. Every wonderful thing from the past 3 months washing over him like a wave of the gentlest, most golden sunshine. He held them to his heart, and one by one, the bubbles dissolved into his chest, safe inside him forever. The map drew itself onward, the lines curling now toward the big blue water slide at the far end of the pool. David climbed out of the water and trotted over to the steps, Rex following along with his long arms swinging happily and his goggles now firmly over his eyes. They climbed together, David taking the steps carefully, Rex having to duck his enormous head under the little archway at the top. From up there, the whole pool sparkled below them like a field of blue diamonds, and David could see the rooftops of the neighborhood beyond, glowing amber in the late afternoon light. Everything felt quiet and beautiful and full. Down the slide they went, David first, whooshing through the curves with a delighted shriek, then Rex, who was so large that his long arms trailed behind him like streamers, and he made a tremendous, wonderful splash that sent waves rolling to every corner of the pool. David came up from the water laughing so hard his tummy hurt, and Rex surfaced next to him, goggles askew, grinning his enormous grin. The map, safely tucked in Rex's bag now, floated to the surface and drew one final line, leading to the very center of the pool, to that small glowing star. "It's time," Rex said, warmly. At the very center of the pool, floating gently on the surface, was a single white water lily. And at the heart of the lily was the softest, most peaceful glow. Pale gold, like the last 5 minutes of a summer sunset. David swam over to it, Rex beside him, and when David reached out and touched the flower, the glow spread up through his fingers and along his arms and settled deep in his chest, right next to his heartbeat. "What is it?" David whispered. Rex smiled down at him, his long arms wrapped gently around his green knees as he floated. "That's your compass," Rex said. It lives inside you now, whenever you feel lost, or unsure, or worried about which way to go. Just be still and listen to your heart. It always knows the way. David floated on his back in the center of the pool, looking up at the sky, which had turned the most extraordinary colors, soft pink and lavender, and the palest, dreamiest blue. The water held him perfectly, gently rocking him from side to side. Rex floated nearby, enormous and peaceful, his long arms spread out wide like green wings. David thought about the map that had drawn itself, how it hadn't shown him someone else's adventure, but his own. He thought about how he'd known somehow which way to go at each step, because something inside him had felt sure and warm and right. He smiled a slow, sleepy smile up at the painted sky. His mom's voice drifted over to him, soft as a lullaby. Time to come in, sweetheart. The sun's going down. David climbed out of the pool slowly, wrapped in the enormous fluffy towel his mom held open for him. He turned to wave goodbye to Rex, who stood at the water's edge, long arms raised high in a grand, warm farewell, goggles pushed up, grinning that wonderful grin. Remember? Rex called out, his voice already sounding faint and dreamy, like something carried on the last warm wind of the season. Trust your heart, David. It always knows. David nodded, clutching his towel around himself as his mom walked him to the car. The pool sparkled behind him in the fading golden light. In the back seat, wrapped in his towel and smelling of sunshine and chlorine, David felt the little warm glow in his chest pulse gently, like a nightlight. His eyes grew heavy. The last day of summer had been the most magical day of all. He yawned, a long, deep, peaceful yawn, and his eyes fluttered and closed, and with a smile still on his face, little David drifted softly, safely, sweetly off to sleep.